This is Alex. He turned a simple blog into one of the largest SaaS conferences in the world.
So did them in London, Dublin, Paris. Yeah, so last financial year we did about $5 million US.
But what's most interesting is he didn't set out to build this as a business. He was just hosting meetups to learn and become a better salesperson, which gave him his golden insight to start this as a business.
And I reached out to a bunch of people, like I got a really good response. And then probably somebody suggested to me, like, why don't you put on an event, like a bigger scale event, not a meetup. So I looked at it and thought, well, that can't be hard, right? I've never done it before. It can't be rocket science.
However, without any business experience, his first event nearly broke him.
I still lost 90,000 on that event. It actually did help us be where we are today, but it also gave me anxiety and panic attacks like at the time. And I was like, how am I going to pay this 90,000, back, right?
But instead of giving up, he turned it into an opportunity.
I had no other option. I got straight back into it, and within a month, probably done about 150,000 in sales.
Today, Alex's business is thriving, not only from the global conferences, which attract over 4,000 people from over 60 different countries, but also from his new membership offerings that he recently started, and he shares more why. So I flew out to Dublin for the SaaStock conference and sat down with Alex before the huge event to learn exactly how he turned free content into Europe's largest SaaS conference and expanded globally, his strategy for creating relationships with influential people, and the revenue breakdowns from Alex's businesses and how anyone else could get started today. Let's dive in. All right, Alex, we're in Dublin. We're currently in the Royal Dublin Society and Community Room.
Yeah.
Excited to be here. Let's dive right in. So you're the founder of the largest SaaS conference in all of Europe. How did you start this?
I mean, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I had a million ideas like growing up and through my 20s, but actually never had that drive or wherewithal and like, how do you turn an idea into a business? So funnily enough, I ended up falling into building SaaStock and the largest community of SaaS in Europe. But I guess the story is that I was 11 years as a sales guy, like selling other people's products. In my last 3 years of that journey, I was in the cloud computing space. I was reading more about SaaS. I was getting interested in that. And I wanted to be a better salesperson at SaaS. So I thought I had this, not crazy idea, but like, why don't I start a blog on SaaS to become a trusted advisor to those that were buying from me? And very quickly, I kind of realized, one, I wasn't a writer, right? And I only knew a little bit about SaaS at the time. But as I was doing that kind of research and discovery, I had another idea. And what I noticed was that there were the vendors out there like HubSpot probably at the time that had their own blogs, inbound blog and stuff like that. And I thought, maybe there is space for like a community-driven blog. So you get the experts, not me, the people that are in the trenches that are doing this like right now to contribute content to this blog to help other SaaS companies and founders grow their businesses. And I really just sort of like cottoned onto this idea, was very fixated on it. It helped that I was turning 30 at the time and just kind of thought like, I really need to start a business. But I would say also like caveat that I wasn't really sure that this was going to be a business, at the time. And I reached out to a bunch of people, but effectively, like I got a really good response. Like people bought into the why, not what I was doing. And before I know it or knew it, I was publishing, 5 pieces of content a week, which was quite a lot. I was pushing out a newsletter a couple of times a week. And then I started getting engagement, from people online and, emails from, people that were working in, Intercom and other companies. So within 3 months, that had like 30,000 visitors a month, at the time. So I was like, there's something there, right? What shall I do next? And I was like, right, I'm going to start a podcast. And I'd never done a podcast before. Probably shitting myself when I did the first podcast. First guest was Mark Roberge, the CRO of HubSpot at the time. And he just had a book out called The Sales Acceleration Formula. And so I bought his book. I invited him to be on the podcast. Again, he was a pay it forward sort of like mindset. He came on despite us having no listeners because it was the first episode. Maybe for 7 years, that was the most listened to podcast that we'd ever done. And quickly I started to build a name for myself and build a network. So then I had the blog, I had the podcast, and then I was like, okay, what's next? Started a Slack channel, started inviting founders over to the channel, not with their opt-in permission. I was just like reaching out, figuring out their emails. Before I knew it, there were hundreds of founders on this Slack channel. And I thought, okay, we've got the blog, we've got the podcast, we've got the Slack channel. What about physical stuff, in-person stuff, right? And I was based in London at the time. There was no meetups for SaaS at the time. So I was like, right, I'm going to put on the first SaaS meetup in London. And I put it on, got the help of somebody else, used the venue for free. We got 3 good speakers and 120 people came from all over the UK. So whilst it was in London, people came from all over the UK. And when they got there, you could see just the smiles on their faces, the fact that it meant so much to them that somebody had actually gone to that effort to put something on and somebody hadn't done it before. And it was a really good event. So I ended up doing like a number of meetups. I did them in London, Dublin, Paris, and so on. And then I was like, I'm doing all of this. So I'm probably working more on this than my full-time job, but there's actually no revenue coming in, right? How do I monetize this, right? And so I tried doing a bit of advertising, but with 30,000 visitors a month, you're not really going to get much money from that. And then probably somebody suggested to me, like, why don't you put on an event, right? Like a bigger scale event, not a meetup. So I looked at it and thought, well, that can't be hard, right? I've never done it before. It can't be rocket science. So I probably underestimated how hard it was. Why don't I get somebody that's been, involved in events to come and help me? So my first hire was somebody that worked at Web Summit, previously. And so got a lot of insights from that. And then, the SaaStock was born. The idea, I didn't call it SaaScribe Conference. I thought, like, we had to have a different name. And it actually also just like fell very naturally, just came to me, SaaStock, like Woodstock of SaaS, and set out that 12 months before the event to start to build this. And because I'd done all this groundwork with the blog, the podcast, everything else, I'd had this credibility and authority like built up within the network that I had, so that I could go out to these people like Nick Franklin from CEO of ChartMogul, for instance. And I said to him, I've got this idea. I'm going to put on this conference, right? I'd love you to sponsor it. And he said, yeah, we'd love that. We really need that. If you do it, I'll sponsor it. He came in as the first ever check, the first ever sponsor. And so I was customer funded then, from, I would say, the get-go of having the idea of the event. Funnily enough, after I signed ChartMogul, again, I probably got a phone call or an email from Patrick Campbell, who's the CEO of Profitwell at the time, and a competitor to ChartMogul, and that was my second customer. And when we launched tickets, we already had an engaged audience, people that were coming to the meetups or reading the blog, listening to the podcast. And that first day of ticket sales, like, I was maybe like a kid in a candy shop, but it was sort of, something like 20,000 revenue came in that first day. And because people were excited, I had built something that people wanted. I'd like to say the rest was history, but it was much harder than that.
Yeah. That's so interesting, the way that you break it down, you putting in the work up front and then deciding to finally monetize it after you had the brand authority is like the good trust.
Yeah. And I say the simple thing was that I was building an audience before actually launching a product, but I didn't really know I was doing that at the time. But that really was pivotal to the success of SaaStock.
What did you do in revenue for that first event?
For the first event, it was around £350,000, which with a team of 2.5 people was, it was pretty good. I still lost 90,000 on that event. And that was because of my mistakes, my inexperience. I was like, I don't want the good stuff. I want the best stuff, right? So I overspent on the event. It actually did help us be where we are today, but it also gave me anxiety and panic attacks at the time. And I was like, walking around the RDS and thinking, how am I going to pay this 90,000, back, right? But effectively, what I did in that position, or because I'd overspent on it and because it was better than it should have been, it enabled me to start rebooking on sponsors and delegates straight away. And then whilst I had that mini wobble of like, how am I going to pay for this? I had no other option but to not take a break and go on the beach and say, these last 12 months have been really difficult. Now I need a month off. I got straight back into it. And within a month, I'd probably done about 150,000 in sales for the next event, which was 12 months time, which then enabled me to, cover off, the payments that I needed to make to settle up on that first event.
Today, what does the business do in revenue? And can you just talk about the breakdown?
Yeah, so last financial year, we did about $5 million US. And the way that's kind of broken down, the majority of that comes from the Dublin event. So we're sitting here today in Dublin for what will start tomorrow for the 7th SaaStock conference in Europe. I would say 75% of our revenue comes from the European event. We launched in the US in 2023, wherein we picked Austin as our home, and that will probably do about, or is doing about just under 20% of our revenue at the moment. But the belief is that it will actually surpass the European event because there are more SaaS companies in the US, there are more founders, it's just a bigger market for events as well. Funnily enough, despite it being the biggest market for SaaS, compared to Europe, there's actually fewer SaaS conferences in the US than there is in Europe. Europe is actually quite saturated now. And then we've got a memberships product called the SaaStock Founder Membership. We want to help thousands of SaaS founders scale faster. We want to help them get to 10 million in revenue and above. So effectively, if you think about it, it's a bit like a YPO or a young president's organization or an entrepreneur's organization, but specifically for B2B SaaS founders. It's doing only around 200K in revenue at the moment. So we know who the customer is, we know who the ICP is, we know why they come, we know how to sell it. It's just putting in that time and scaling it up. And it's a repeatable, scalable process. And whilst the event is a little bit repeatable and scalable and predictable, it's kind of less so, right? It's not a recurring revenue business as such.
There's 3 tiers depending on the stage of the company?
It's going to be 3 tiers. So we've got a traction tier, which is your kind of entry level. And at the moment, the bar is you've got to have 100K in ARR up to $1 million. And that's 1,999 euros a year. And then we have a growth stage, so between 1 million and 10 million, which is 2,999 euros a year. And then we're launching a scale tier as well for those that are over 10 million as well.
So how many total members today, and where do you see that total membership number going?
Yeah, so we've got 90 CEOs today. All of these CEOs are real advocates of SaaStock now as well. I expect that we'll get this first into the hundreds and then into the thousands. That will be a multi-million ARR product for us.
Have there been any additions to either the membership or the conference that I feel like you're really good at getting your customer feedback and implementing those? Any examples of things that you've added or changed because of customer feedback? Yeah,
100%. I'll tell you what, like the first 4 or 5 years of the company, we kept saying like, we're really bad at getting customer feedback. Like, yeah, we do an NPS survey like after every event and generally get a pretty good score and, be content with that. And probably would once we get the results, just scan through and see what people said and so on and so forth. But I would say that was kind of like the extent of customer feedback, right? Now we're so much better at that, and we've done within the last 12 months and after the last Dublin event, we worked with an agency, a third party that are within our industry to do a customer insights report. And it was pretty eye-opening, right? What we saw was that in some parts we were kind of like falling out of product market fit a little bit, which I naturally had thought certainly for many years that we just found this instant product market fit and we scaled up. And like part of that, the early scaling, right, was timing, was really strong, healthy market. And then as the market has changed, we're obviously finding the challenges, and we have to be, try and be this must-have conference rather than nice to have. And so what we found was that if you look at the early days of the SaaStock, the speakers were the star, the speakers were the product, the speakers, certainly in my mind, were the people that were drawing the attendees to come to the event, right? Now you see that actually people don't really come for the content, as much, right? And the number one reason that we got from the customer insight survey, why do people come, right? It's for meetings, it's for networking. And content was down at like number 3 or number 4 out of a list of 5. So what we have done, we've obviously taken that on board. We put networking front and center of SaaStock. So when you go into the main expo floor, what do you see right in the heart of SaaStock? All the meeting tables, all the networking area, and really trying to facilitate that and try and get as many one-to-one meetings of value to everybody that attends as possible. So like if we look at 2019, even maybe 2022, we had 5 stages of content that's running all day. It's really spreading out that audience. There's too many choices. They're overwhelmed. Where do I go to watch, this talk with this CEO or somewhere over here and so on and so forth. So we had like 250 speakers in 2019. Like we've got 100 this year. So we've cut that down. We start at I think the first piece of content is 10:30, right? So the doors open at 9, but people can, have their breakfast, have their coffees, kind of warm up, and then, get ready to center stage as well. But yeah, so a lot of changes, but mostly by putting connections and networking at the heart of SaaStock and making that the core reason that people come here and get the value from it.
And so today you look at a lot of companies and people throw around the word community, I think a lot, arguably maybe too much. And oftentimes it doesn't really mean anything. For you guys, what I've observed is it's a real thing. What do you think most companies get wrong, or like what is different about SaaStock, or what should other companies think about in terms of community? Yeah,
it's a good question. So I guess SaaStock exists because I built community, built that audience, from the get-go. So even when it was a blog and a newsletter, like there was engagement and I was engaging with that audience. But it almost felt like a community, kind of at that stage before we were getting together in person. But the in-person stuff is really important, right? And that was the piece of the puzzle that was missing sort of like back then. And then you see the magic of when you get people, together in person, the value that adds, because then it's not the content that I'm sourcing, And, publishing online, it's founder to founder having a conversation like, hey, like, how did you overcome this challenge? And then they're just sharing like everything. And at the very first SaaStock, it was a 1-day conference, but there was some side events that were happening on the first day before that. And I attended an event that was run by Point 9 Capital at a private members club in St. Stephen's Green. And they'd invited like 35 founders who had pretty much come from 35 different cities or countries, across the world, had never met each other, but instantly connected and glued because the commonality was they were all B2B SaaS founders, trying to grow their companies. And it was like, that was a bit of an aha moment, or, for me, that, hey, look, what I'm doing is really valuable. Even though I didn't put on that event, I brought the people to Dublin and the magic was just happening. But what you've got to do is like do this consistently. So how do you do this on a regular cadence? Well, okay, SaaStock in Dublin happens once a year. Then what do you do in between? We have SaaStock Local, which is we've now found a way, like since 2018, how do we do this at scale and have like evangelists, like SaaS enthusiasts that don't work for SaaStock, but really want to be part of bringing a SaaS community together, and we give them the tools to do that. So we can run regular like meetups like throughout the year, and currently we're doing them in like 30 different cities across the world with that, and we're looking to scale that into the hundreds as well. And I think like once we have that, it's like something that's not very replicable, like from the competition and so on. And it's not easy. And I think the mistake probably most people make is they just spin up something like online, whether it's a Discord or a Slack or something like that, and they invite people in. And probably most people realize that after 6 months, oh, damn, this community thing's hard, right? And it's taken me time away from like building my product or, my core business. And then they give up like too soon. But you have to be, I think, passionate about community for it to be successful. And because I started community before I probably had the product, and I recognize the importance of it, and like I'm very passionate about it, and it's why I'm doing it, almost 10 years later.
So if somebody is watching this and thinking about for themselves, maybe starting an event business or starting some sort of community, maybe they have a small business already, and maybe they're feeling a little bit like you were feeling at 30, where they want to be doing that thing. Yeah. What would you advise them to start an events business? Like, what would your advice?
If you've got huge costs to pay, if you've got promises to sponsors that you're going to get this many people there and a certain quality, it can become a little bit stressful. Like, is it going to happen? And you have to trust the process. And I guess because I've been doing this for a long time now, I know that again, if you do the right things and you trust the process, it comes together. But it does get stressful. And then I have a fleeting moment of like, why do I do that? Why am I in this industry? But I do find it like, I'll get the peaks and troughs of like really intense levels of stress and worry and concern. But ultimately, over the years, I've hardened myself to it. So I think when you're newer, that's maybe when the panic attacks and like the anxiousness can come in. But now I'm a lot more kind of calm and like, okay, steady the ship. Like it's going to happen. It's going to work out. And almost always it does. So I think you've got to be, to your question, a certain type of person, I think, to want to do events, for instance, right? But it can be a very good business. It can be a very lucrative business, right? But I think also you've got to be, again, don't just do it because it's opportunistic. You've got to be passionate about this, right? Because it is bloody hard, but it also be so rewarding. And when I have these wobbles, I remind myself like very quickly that, when you deliver the event and all these people are there and you're delivering value or they're getting value from it, and then they give you that feedback that they're getting value from it and they thank you to their core that you've done this, that's when you remember that this was all worthwhile, that you're doing something like really good here. So I like for that's something that really kind of drives me.
I've been to a lot of events, I've hosted events, and I'm sure you've observed the same thing. There's a certain serendipity that happens at an event in the real world. Any interesting like serendipitous stories or anything stick out top of mind over the years?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, there's a ton with Dublin. What I'd like to say is that serendipity is dead, but I mean, I'll explain that. But in general, like through the history of SaaStock, like I believe for a long time that the simplicity of what we do and what I do was I pick a date, I pick a venue, I invite, the right people, and then the magic just happens, and then you leave it to serendipity, right? And to an extent, that has created value and has been the case for, a period of time. And when you talk about serendipity, like, in Dublin, and one of the reasons that we're in Dublin, like not London, where, I'm from, London is such a mega city. It's so big, right? I've never been to a good conference in London. Sorry to all the conferences that are in London, but I've never been to one. And, people just go to the event. They go in later. They go back to their office to do a few meetings if they don't like it. Or if they've traveled in, they go shopping and like, let's go to Regent Street, or let's do all these things and the shiny things that London offers. Now, Dublin's got a lot of great things to offer, right? Especially the Guinness and all the local pubs and things like that. But it's so much smaller that when you experience, over the next few days, and if you go into central Dublin, and you're still wearing your lanyard, you'll recognize there's a bunch of people, from the SaaStock conference. You never see that in London, right? So then you can actually then go up to them, whether they're in the pub or on the street, and like talk about the event or something that you learned, and so on and so forth. Maybe another serendipitous to an extent sort of story, but I think it was like 2019, and Godard Abel, the CEO of G2, who I've got to know like quite well, and he introduced me to this Russian guy called Andre. That Andre then actually met his Series C founder at SaaStock. He was there to meet the investor, completed his Series C, which I think was a 60 million round, and he is the founder and CEO of Miro, which is now doing like 500 million in revenue. But like I just had this like brief intro, and I had no idea who this person was. But that's the type of thing that kind of happens at SaaStock. But to clarify why I say serendipity is dead, is that I think what we've learned over the last 12 months is you can't rely on serendipity alone to deliver value to your customers. And we had like many of these conversations at last year's event and since, where again, our customers are saying like, okay, great, you've got all these people here, but we just find it hard to find the right people, in 3,000 or 4,000 people. So how do you help us with that? So we've kind of been saying internally, a little bit externally, that serendipity is dead. And now we have to really kind of, organize and curate a lot more the connections, right? And focus on the connections and say, to our customers, like, who do you want to meet? How can we help you meet them? And that's kind of the direction that we're going in, and no longer believing that it's as simple as just inviting everybody and leaving it over to everyone.
Yeah, so maybe it's engineered serendipity, or serendipity is dead unless you figure out how to design it yourself. Yeah. So you've gone to tons of these events, you've hosted these events. Any pro tips for anybody going to an event, or maybe first timers?
Definitely, like a pro tip is like always do like some advanced work. Like have an objective, right? Why are you coming here? Have a clear objective. For some people, it may be and still is learning. And so they're like, okay, so if it's learning, look through the agenda. Which talks do you really want to see? Which talks are going to be impactful for you and your business? And just make sure that you're at those talks, right? But don't come in and like kind of clueless and not sure and sit through talks that maybe are not relevant to you, because not everything is going to be super relevant, right, to everybody. The same, I think, for a lot of people, if their number one reason is for networking, and therefore probably to do business out of networking, right? Like get on the event app, a week early, kind of go through that, look at the type of people that you want to meet, get meetings set in advance. A lot of people do this, and if you do this, like you're already set for success. Book 20 meetings before you come to SaaStock, right? Get those set, and then you're almost, certain to get something out of that, right? So I think just some advanced preparation, and I know, and I've done it before, where I've gone to events or mega events, and I just haven't had the time to prep and plan. And then you just get the least out of it, right? Like, that wasn't a good event for me. Well, did you do all the preparation? No, I didn't, because I was too busy, right? So I think that's pretty key.
Yeah, and you guys also make it really easy. I downloaded the app the other day, and I immediately just got messages of, hey, like basically you want to connect more when we're at the event. What app do you use? And
we currently use an app called Brella. I think we've been using it for the last 3 editions. And it's very strong on the one-to-one meeting front, which is very good, given that that's probably the number one priority for us, at the event. What we find with event apps and event tech, right, there isn't like one perfect solution for all of your needs. But what they're very good at is one-to-one meetings, and so therefore, like that's what we're working with at the moment, and it is good, and people like it. And you can get obviously you fill out your profile, and then it will match you with people that you're looking to meet, and so that's kind of helpful, gives you a head start. And then you can book meetings on tables, and so you have like set area of like where you can meet these people, what time. So it's very strong in that component.
Maybe we'll go get it behind the scenes. I know everyone's setting up out there now. In how many people will be coming to SaaStock Dublin this year?
Yeah, so we're expecting around 4,000 people across the 3 days. You get a lot of like, I don't know, we probably should look at this, and I'm not sure we've been capturing the data, but generally we know anecdotally that like people will fly in on Monday, some will stay through to the Wednesday, some people only come in on the Wednesday, some do Tuesday to Wednesday. So you never get everybody there, at any one time. But over the 3 days, we're expecting 4,000 folks, and flying in from almost 60 different countries. And some of the countries, again, like every year, I'm like, there's a SaaS founder in Afghanistan that's flying over, and coming, which I think is pretty cool, or Panama, or all these different like countries. And it often just every year just surprises me. I mean, it probably shouldn't. SaaS is global, but folks are just kind of flying in. And I think that also what really makes SaaStock work, SaaStock Europe work, is that it is a destination event, right? So of course you've got a lot of people from Ireland here, but if you've got people flying in from 59 countries, they're really committed, and they're here morning, noon, and night, right, for the time that they're here.
That's so cool. Okay, let's go take a look at the space.
Yes, sir.
Cool. A question about this. I see like things like this. Is it like this is a paid placement?
This is a paid placement. So Togai are one of our partners and a first-time partner. Actually, I found them and closed them. They're based in India. They flew over for this, which was great. They subsequently then were like upsold and doing some activations and decided on this kind of like Harry Potter style, pillars. Something different. And I like these kind of little touches and moments that our partners bring. I think like the more activations, the better. Enhances your overall like sponsorship and experience of the event.
How about this one that I saw in the bathroom?
Yeah.
Is that a paid place?
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is. Yeah. Because like actually we've got these QR codes for rebooking, and we were told that we can't put them up on pillars or in the bathroom or anything like that. But because this partner had paid for it, that we were allowed to do it.
Oh, wow.
And so, you kind of wish actually for more of this sort of stuff.
It was clever.
Should be simple.
Yeah.
See, now overlooking everything, and just kind of great to see, I guess, what we've been building over the last 12 months. See it come together, and pretty happy with it, I have to say. Yeah.
Right. And when you go back to your very first one, was it this full size, or is it
we weren't allowed to have this room. So we started with the two back room. We had hall 3 and then another room over there, and we graduated. So actually it was quite a big moment when they said, you can have this, you're ready for this now. Yeah. And then actually to see this, because I think this is the best space for an expo, works so well. Yeah, we could go even bigger, but I think we want to limit it to a certain amount of I think if you scale too much, you could dilute SaaStock, right? And people will start liking it less, and that's happened obviously with other events, right?
Totally. So Cal Newport is the author of many books, but one is So Good They Can't Ignore You. He mentioned this concept of being in the cutting edge of your industry, and then with those data points, make new decisions. Charlie Munger says the same thing. And if we're studying your journey, that's exactly what you've done now a couple of times. First, you were at the cutting edge by just content and writing, and then that turned into events, which turned into memberships, and now you're able to do that and then leverage that into investments. And I guess as we're studying that, the reason why it's valuable is because you see things other people don't, because you're at the cutting edge. Yeah. What are some of the things that you see that other people don't see?
What I probably am able to see, maybe kind of quicker than most, is what are the really interesting companies and really interesting founders, right? And there are different ways I can do this. In a lot of the cases, I'm being introduced to a lot more people than others are. I mentioned earlier, and whilst we wouldn't have been able to invest in a Series C company, Andre from Miro, for instance, right? But we do get that at the earlier stage as well, right? And we do, with the network I have with the investors here or so on, they're introducing me to really smart sort of young founders and able to build that connection. An example, again, we didn't have the fund at the time, but I met Hanno Renner, who is the CEO of Personio, when they were a 4-person company back in 2015. Got to become, we've kind of lost touch a little bit now. He's running a decacorn company. But I had that kind of early exposure, right? And similarly with Hopin, for example, which I know they flamed out, but they became the fastest growing SaaS business of all time during COVID, valued at 5.6 billion. I actually got to see their pre-seed deck before a lot of people because an investor who invested in this pre-seed round asked me for my opinion, on this company. There's this kind of early access, but also I guess I've got some pattern, matching recognition where I can probably identify quite quickly what is a really interesting company and really interesting founder and what am I, less interested in, and just kind of follow these kind of instincts. So I think that's something that I guess I've sort of developed over time.
In terms of like resources or technology, are there any like tools that, or even categories of tools that, say your computer got wiped, what would be the first thing that you re-downloaded or things that are pivotal to your business?
I think probably the first thing is Slack, right? I mean, if that goes down, we've been actually I wanted to use Slack when we were a 1-person company, but it was just me, and I was like, I need to hire somebody so I can use Slack, right? But we've had it since 2016, like pretty much. And as soon as Slack goes down, there's almost like a paralysis, right? How does the team communicate with each other? Like second, I guess this is not like our specific tool in terms of what we pay for, but LinkedIn is like seemingly super valuable for us sort of right now. I would say probably the number one social channel for SaaStock. So with SaaStock, we use HubSpot. And I got into that. I mean, we went through so many CRMs. We had Pipedrive, maybe we had Zoho at one point. We even started just on spreadsheets. And I think it's also important to note that when you start out, you can, run your CRM on a spreadsheet, right? Probably for a number, like 1 or 2 years before it gets a little bit messy. And we did. But on the fund, I'm using a product called Attio, which is a new sort of like CRM. And I'm really enjoying that. And it's sort of low cost. And it definitely has, like, from a user experience perspective, seems a lot more fun than HubSpot. And HubSpot gets, like, whilst we are a customer and like happy, it gets very expensive. Like the more data you put into it.
What have been some of the biggest learnings that you've had in the last few years running these businesses?
A lot, right? I think one is certainly, as we mentioned, like with myself effectively running 3 businesses. If I was only doing one and focused on one, like there would be more impact. It would be scaling faster, or like even on the fund, if I was just focused on the fund, I could fundraise so much quicker. So I noticed the periods where, if I look at 6 months ago where I was fully focused on fundraising and how quickly I was able to achieve, certain milestones. And then when I get sucked back into the events business, the clear correlation, how that slows down, right? So definitely, like it's an obvious learning for me, but it's also the position I've put myself in and a little bit difficult to change at the moment. I think something like we touched on kind of earlier in terms of when we talk about community, it's actually the tech doesn't really matter, right? Like we've tried like many different like tech platforms. We tried it, when we first launched a community, we tried putting people on an app. I can't even remember the name of it, right? But people were not used to downloading this app and being on this app and how did the app work? And it just kind of flopped straight away, right? People didn't really care. You do need a place for them to communicate, and we are now on WhatsApp, and it's a platform that pretty much everybody has. Getting it engaged still took time. But we learned that it wasn't about the tech, and it wasn't about spending tens of thousands on an app and having the best app, because nobody cared, right? Nobody cared. So that's something that's been a big learning for us. Yeah.
Are there any final messages that you'd want to leave the viewer with to somebody who's watching this and wanting to grow their own business? What's one final challenge or message that you want to leave with?
I think the final message is I guess, like, I'm super glad I started SaaStock when I did, but I kind of also wish that I'd started earlier, right? And having that 10-year period where I had all these ideas, but never started a business because I just thought that capital was probably the main restriction, when actually, it wasn't. And so I spent 10 years working for other people, which I think, is absolutely fine and has made me who I am today. But I think if you have an idea and you're passionate about it, just start, right? And just get to it. And I never started until, I started SaaStock, right? But there were maybe so many things. Maybe SaaStock could have been my second business or my third business, and I could have achieved other things before that. So I think if you've got that idea that you're really kind of set on and passionate about, like, I maybe sort of caveat that because like what I did with building the audience in the beginning, I was kind of doing customer development work for something that generated revenue, right? So I would speak to customers and make sure that what you're building is something that people want. Because I think the number one reason that companies and startups fail is because they build something that nobody wants, right? So don't just go out, do this crazy idea because you think it's the best thing in the world, but do start and but get the customer development and don't wait 10 years like I did.
Don't wait, find your customer first and then just get started.
Yeah.
And then cap it at 3 businesses, no more after that.
Do one. We'll see. Just do one.
Alex, thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Check them out, Alex's story. Sweet. Awesome. Sweet.